D-Day. It's celebrated around the world as a key moment in the Allies' defeat of the Nazi regime. So much so that there have been books and movies about that fateful day, but primarily from the Allied perspective. But what about the German perspective? What actions did they take that led to their defeat? Let's revisit exactly what happened on D-Day, but through the eyes of Germany's armed forces. June 6, 1944, 10 a.m. The air is thick with smoke and the acrid stench of gunpowder. The relentless roar of artillery and the screams of men echo across the blood-soaked sand. The location? Omaha Beach, Normandy, France. The Allied invasion of France, known as D-Day, is well underway. Corporal Heinrich Falk, a young Nazi soldier, crouches behind a crumbling concrete bunker. He can barely control the trembling of his hands as he attempts to reload his rifle. The sea behind him is filled with Allied landing boats, dropping wave after wave of soldiers onto the shore. As they storm the beach, his mind struggles to make sense of it all. How did it come to this? How did we not see it coming? A few days earlier, on June 3, 1944, he had been present in the German command bunker in nearby Pas-de-Calais, where the site of the impending Allied invasion was being debated. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with tension from battle-hardened soldiers. Maps of the French coastline were spread across a large table marked with red and blue pins indicating potential Allied landing sites. Oberlieutenant Klaus Reinhardt, a seasoned officer with a cold, calculating mind and an even colder heart, paced up and down the room. His boots clicked against the concrete floor, his steps echoing like a metronome, counting down to an inevitable disaster. "They will land here," Reinhardt declared, stabbing a finger at the map. "Pas-de-Calais. This is the shortest crossing from England. It's the logical place to land." Heinrich shifted uncomfortably from his position, standing at attention near the door. He was barely 20 years old and looked it, but his eyes told the story of what he'd experienced during the war. He'd seen enough to know that logic is often irrelevant during the chaos of battle. "But what if they don't, sir?" he ventured cautiously. "What if they choose Normandy?" Reinhardt stopped pacing abruptly and fixed on Heinrich with his steely gaze. "Normandy? That's impossible. The beaches are too exposed and the terrain too difficult. The Allies are not fools, Falk. They'll come where we least expect them, but where we are most prepared." Heinrich nodded, though he was far from convinced. He'd heard the rumors. The Allies had been feeding false information, suggesting an attack on Calais instead of the actual location. And as it turns out, his doubts were extremely well-founded. In March 1944, the Allies had launched a disinformation campaign called Operation Fortitude North, with the intention of convincing the Germans that an Allied invasion of Normandy was imminent. The operation was a success. Valuable German troops and resources had been diverted away from France, setting the first dominoes in motion for the invasion of Normandy that would follow. Encouraged by the success of the operation, the Allies launched Operation Fortitude South. The operation used double agents like Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, to feed false information to German intelligence. Garbo's network of fictional spies reported the buildup of FUSAG, reinforcing the illusion of an impending attack on Pas-de-Calais. FUSAG, short for the 1st United States Army Group, was an entirely fictional force, invented out of thin air by the Allied command in order to deceive the Germans as to where the Allies would land in France. This fictional force was supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton, a military commander respected and feared by the Germans. It was stationed in southeast England, complete with inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and fake radio traffic. As a result of intercepting these transmissions, the Germans swallowed the bait. In fact, just a few weeks before D-Day, in May 1944, the control room at the Allied High Command, London, had been a hive of activity. Maps and charts sprawled across every available surface, marked with arrows, battle lines, and the weight of history. At the center stood General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, his piercing gaze sweeping the room. Beside him, Lieutenant General Frederick E. Morgan, his trusted Deputy Chief of Staff, leaned in, murmuring updates. But the man who held the real secret to their strategy was just a step away. Colonel David Strangeways, the mastermind behind Operation Bodyguard, the most audacious deception in military history. Under its shadow, Fortitude North and Fortitude South were in motion, calculated illusions that, if successful, would shatter the German defenses. "Gentlemen," Eisenhower began in a calm, firm voice, "the success of Overlord hinges on our ability to mislead the enemy. If they suspect Normandy, we're finished." Colonel Strangeways stepped forward, a sly smile playing on his lips. "We've already set the stage, sir. The Germans are convinced that Pas-de-Calais is our target. They've swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker." He was right. As expressed by Reinhardt to Falk in the German command bunker, the Nazis were convinced that Patton would lead the main assault on Pas-de-Calais because it was the narrowest point of the English Channel. In the days and months before D-Day, Garbo would send hundreds of messages to his German handlers, distracting them from the upcoming assault. Even in the days following the Normandy landings, Garbo continued to tell the Germans that the attack will target Pas-de-Calais. For the Nazis, Garbo was a trusted source of information and would even be awarded the Iron Cross for his efforts, but little did the Germans know that Garbo was actually a double agent, one of the most effective to be developed under the double cross system. This operation, under the control of the British intelligence service MI5, was an ingenious and highly effective counterintelligence operation that targeted German spies and turned them into double agents for the British. Thanks to Garbo's deception, 2 days before D-Day, most of the German command still had no idea that the actual D-Day landing site was to be in Normandy, not Pas-de-Calais. On June 4th, the men of the 352nd Infantry Division go about their duties, fortifying the Normandy coastline with barbed wire, mines, and concrete barriers. The 352nd Infantry Division was one of the most experienced and well-equipped units on the Atlantic Wall. Their positions are carefully arranged to create overlapping fields of fire, ensuring that any advancing troops will be exposed to withering fire from multiple directions. Sergeant Erich Bauer, a grizzled veteran with a face like a Himalayan cliff, pauses from his labor to wipe the sweat off his brow with his sleeve. Bauer has seen enough war to know that no amount of preparation can guarantee victory. "Volk!" Bauer barks, spotting Heinrich as he emerges from the bunker. "Quit daydreaming! Get to work! Those machine guns aren't going to clean themselves!" Heinrich salutes and hurries to join the others, but as he works, he can't shake the feeling something far worse than any of them could imagine is coming, and soon. He worries that the extensive German preparations for the impending invasion would prove no match for the eventual Allied onslaught. These preparations, dubbed the Atlantic Wall, began in December 1941, and in March 1942, Chancellor Adolf Hitler issued Directive No. 40, which ordered the construction of a coastal defense along the Atlantic and North Sea coastlines. The organization TOT, a civil and military engineering group, began large-scale construction of bunkers, gun emplacements, and obstacles to fulfill Hitler's directive. The construction and the constitution of the Atlantic Wall were overseen by some of Germany's most senior military leaders. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, was responsible for the overall defense of Western Europe. However, it was Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, appointed by Hitler in November 1943 as inspector of the Atlantic Wall, who had brought a new sense of urgency to the project. Rommel, the famed Desert Fox, had seen firsthand the devastating power of Allied air superiority in North Africa and was determined to prevent a repeat on the European mainland. Following his appointment as inspector, Rommel began immediately touring the defenses, which swept all the way from the windswept cliffs of Norway to the sandy beaches of Normandy and beyond, all the way to Spain. He had demanded improvements and reinforcements. "The war will not be won or lost on the beaches," he had declared presciently. "We must stop the enemy at the water's edge before they can establish a foothold." The defenses were substantial and required a vast amount of labor and materials. The TOT organization employed around 500,000 workers, including forced laborers from the occupied countries. Concrete, steel, and timber were requisitioned from across Europe, often at the expense of civilian infrastructure. The work was difficult and very dangerous. Thousands of laborers died from exhaustion, malnutrition, and Allied bombing raids, and the German soldiers tasked with manning the defenses often faced harsh conditions, with inadequate supplies and the constant threat of Allied air attacks. But despite their hardships, over 15,000 bunkers were constructed, housing machine guns, artillery, and observation posts. These bunkers were often built into cliffs or dunes to provide maximum cover. Rommel also ordered the installation of millions of defensive obstacles, including wooden stakes, steel hedgehogs, and concrete tetrahedrons, designed to impede landing craft and tanks. Millions of landmines were laid along the coastline and inland, creating deadly barriers for advancing troops. And to top all of that off, heavy coastal guns such as the massive 155mm and 210mm batteries were positioned strategically along the coast to target Allied ships and landing craft. In particular, the critical port city of Cherbourg was surrounded by a ring of fortifications, including coastal batteries and anti-aircraft guns. The narrowest point of the English Channel, Calais, was the focus of much of the German defensive effort, with over 2,000 bunkers and extensive artillery positions installed. Despite efforts, the wall was never fully completed, with many sections left unfinished or poorly constructed. Normandy still featured significant defenses, particularly around Omaha Beach, where the experienced 352nd Infantry Division was stationed. And it was here that Reinhardt, Falk, and Bauer found themselves as the invasion unfolded. On June 4, 1944, the weather is foul on the Normandy coastline. The sky, a brooding gray that seemed to mirror the mood of the men. Heinrich stands watch in a concrete pillbox overlooking the beach, his binoculars trained on the horizon. Back at the command bunker, Reinhardt's growing increasingly agitated. The latest intelligence reports are conflicting, and the uncertainty is giving him knots in his stomach. What if they've outsmarted us? He mutters to himself, staring at the map. What if they're coming somewhere else entirely? The phone suddenly rings, startling him. He picks it up, his voice sharp. Reinhardt, he answers. A voice on the other end is calm, maybe too calm. Oberlieutenant, we've accepted a coded message. The Allies are planning an attack, but we don't know where. Reinhardt slams the phone down, his frustration boiling over. Damn them all. The question on everyone's mind was, where will the Allies strike? The answer to that question will determine the fate of the Third Reich, yet no one can agree on what it was. At the heart of the confusion is a fundamental disagreement between the two most senior German commanders in the West, who we encountered earlier in our story. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, a pragmatic and experienced commander-in-chief West, and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the energetic and hands-on commander of Army Group B. Von Rundstedt, stationed in his headquarters at Saint-Germain-en-Laye in Paris, is like Reinhardt, convinced that the Allies would target Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. It's the logical choice, he argues. They will come where we are strongest because they must. Rommel, however, sees a different view. From his headquarters at La Roche-Guyon, a chateau overlooking the Seine River, he has spent months touring the Normandy coastline, strengthening its defense. He believes the Allies might choose Normandy despite its challenges, precisely because the Germans will not expect it. They will come where we are weakest, Rommel warns, and they will come soon. Adding to the confusion is Hitler himself. At Berghof, his mountain retreat in Berchtesgaden, the Führer vacillates between certainty and doubt. On June 5th, he receives conflicting intelligence reports. One report suggests the Allies are planning a diversionary attack in Normandy, with the main assault to follow at Pas-de-Calais. Another, the same report based on intercepted Allied communications that so frustrated Reinhardt, hints at an imminent invasion, but the location remains unclear. Hitler, relying on his infamous intuition, declares, "They will come at Calais. Normandy is a feint." Yet even he cannot shake a lingering sense of unease. That evening, during a late-night meeting with his inner circle, he muses, "What if I'm wrong? What if they are more cunning than we think?" As the night wears on, conflicting orders begin to ripple through the German chain of command. At 10 p.m. on June 5th, Rommel leaves La Roche-Guyon to visit his wife in Germany for her birthday. He's convinced that the weather is too poor for an invasion. Before departing, he orders his troops to remain on high alert and authorizes the deployment of his formidable panzer tank reserves near to the coast. Then the storm begins to abate. By midnight, the rain has stopped and the clouds part to reveal a sliver of moonlight. Heinrich feels a chill run down his spine. Something is about to happen. But before it does, the Allies begin one final masterful piece of deception to confuse the Germans about the site of the invasion. During the night of June 5, 1944, a fleet of small boats and aircrafts dropped thousands of aluminum strips known as windows to simulate an invasion fleet heading toward Pas-de-Calais. Simultaneously, a small group of paratroopers drop dummy parachutists and play recorded sounds of battle to further confuse the Germans. Around midnight, the 1st Allied paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division, 82nd Airborne Division, and the British 6th Airborne Division begin landing behind enemy lines to secure key positions. The battle has begun. Their mission is to secure key roads, bridges, and towns to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. But the Germans have been expecting this kind of attack, and casualties among the landing paratroopers are high. By 1 a.m., German coastal radar stations are lit up with unusual activity in the English Channel. But the reports are dismissed as Allied deception or minor raids. Then at 2 a.m., reports begin to filter in of Allied paratroopers landing behind enemy lines in Normandy. General Erich Marx, commander of the 84th Corps stationed in Normandy, immediately recognizes the gravity of the situation. He orders his troops to mobilize and sends urgent messages to both Rommel and von Rundstedt, pleading for reinforcements. While the Nazis vacillated, at 4 a.m. the first wave of Allied landing craft hit the beaches of Normandy. The scale of the invasion is now undeniable, yet the German high command remains paralyzed by indecision. Von Rundstedt, convinced that Normandy was a feint and the main attack will come at Pas-de-Calais, hesitates to commit his reserves. Back on Omaha Beach, Heinrich is jolted awake by the sound of distant explosions. He scrambles to his feet, grabbing his rifle, as Bauer bursts into the pillbox. "They're here!" Bauer screams, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "The Allies are landing!" Heinrich's heart is pounding as he takes his position at the machine gun. Through the narrow slit of the pillbox, he can see the horizon lit up with flashes of light. The sea is alive with ships, their silhouettes dark against the pre-dawn sky. The first wave of landing crafts hit the beach, emptying hundreds of Allied soldiers onto the sand. Heinrich presses the trigger and his machine gun roars to life, cutting down men as they struggle through the surf. The air is filled with the screams of the wounded and dying, and the deafening roar of artillery. They struggle to advance across the open beach, their progress slowed by the heavy fire and the need to clear obstacles. Casualties are staggering, with entire units pinned down on the sand or in the shallow water, cut down by fire from Heinrich and his comrades. But decisive help is on the way. At 5 a.m., the Allied naval bombardment begins. Allied bombers begin pounding German defenses along the Normandy coastline, targeting German bunkers, artillery positions, and beach obstacles. The main wave of landing craft is approaching the beaches. During this initial bombardment, over 1,000 bombers drop around 13,000 bombs over a sustained period on the Germans. However, many miss their targets due to poor visibility. A major offensive is indisputably underway, yet the German high command remains paralyzed by indecision. Von Rundstedt, still convinced that Normandy is a diversion, remains non-committal. Rommel, hundreds of miles away in Germany, is frantically trying to return to the front. At 6 a.m., von Rundstedt finally resigns himself to the reality on the ground and contacts General Alfred Jodl, chief of operations at Hitler's headquarters. Jodl is hesitant to wake Hitler and denies the request, stating, "The Fuhrer believes the main attack will come at Calais. We must not be hasty. The Fuhrer must not be disturbed," he added. On the battlefield, the intensity is rising. At 6:30 a.m., the first main wave of Allied troops lands at Omaha Beach. The 1st Infantry Division and 29th Infantry Division face heavy resistance from the 352nd Infantry Division as they try to disembark, with hundreds cut down by machine gun fire and artillery before they even reach the sand. Many Sherman DD tanks sink in the rough seas or are damaged by the many obstacles erected on the beach by the Germans, leaving the infantry without armored support. At 7 a.m., the second wave of troops disembarks, but they fare only slightly better than the earlier wave. Without the support of the foundered tanks, the infantry is forced to rely on their own weapons and the occasional covering fire from naval guns. Engineers work desperately to clear paths through the obstacles, while the Germans annihilate them with machine guns and artillery. But despite the carnage, huge losses, and slow progress, the Allies just keep coming, relentlessly. For Heinrich and his fellow soldiers defending the beach, it seems like a never-ending stream of troops emptying onto the beach, and the sheer number of troops and their determinations are starting to take their toll. Heinrich's hands are slick with sweat as he reloads his machine gun. The pillbox is full of empty bullet casings. His mind is numb with the horror of what he's experiencing. Bauer is shouting orders beside him, and Heinrich can't hear what he's barking. His voice is drowned out by the chaos. Although the Americans have already suffered over 2,000 casualties and the beach is littered with the dead and wounded, by 8 a.m., small groups of Allied soldiers begin to break through. Using grenades, Bangalore torpedoes, and sheer determination, they clear key bunkers and begin to advance up the bluffs overlooking the beach. The Germans resist staunchly, but their resolve is starting to wither under the relentless onslaught. At 9 a.m., the 2nd Ranger Battalion are scaling the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, neutralizing German artillery that's been wreaking destruction on the Allied forces on the beaches below. Naval gunfire, directed by forward observers on the beach, pounds German positions, silencing key bunkers and allowing the infantry to advance. At 9:30 a.m., Heinrich and Bauer's pillbox is hit by a shell, the explosion throwing Heinrich to the ground. Dazed, his ears ringing, Heinrich struggles to his feet. Bauer is lying nearby, blood pooling beneath him. "Bauer!" Heinrich shouts, crawling to his side. Bauer's eyes are glassy, his breathing shallow. "Get out of here, Volk," he gasps. "It's over." Heinrich shakes his head, tears streaming down his face. "I can't leave you." However, Bauer has already left him. His body is limp in Heinrich's arms. But this is no time for grief. Around 10 a.m., Allied reinforcements begin to land. Naval destroyers move closer to the shore, providing direct fire support. The tide of the battle turns decisively as the Allies secure a tenuous foothold on the beach. The German defenders, though still fighting fiercely, are beginning to run low on ammunition and manpower. Some begin surrendering. The Allies begin to push inland and establish a beachhead. Incredibly, it's only now, at 10 a.m., 10 hours after the invasion began, that Hitler is finally briefed on the situation. His initial reaction is one of disbelief. "This cannot be the main attack," he insists. "It is a trick." Initially, he refuses to authorize the release of the 12th SS Panzer Division and the Panzer Lehr Division, two of the most powerful armored units in the German arsenal. He wants confirmation. But before long, he buckles to the pressure from his advisors and gives the order for their release. However, their advance is hampered by overwhelming Allied air superiority, which targets their columns with relentless bombing and strafing runs. As a result, by the time the surviving units reach the front lines, the Allies have established a strong foothold, with the 29th Infantry Division pushing toward Verville-sur-Mer. The opportunity to repel the invasion has passed. For Heinrich, it's too little, too late. By 10:30 a.m., he is alone on the beach, the rest of his unit either dead or fleeing. The Allies are advancing, their tanks rolling onto the beach as their soldiers push forward. Naval gunfire from destroyers like the USS McCook and HMS Taliban pound German positions, silencing key bunkers and allowing the Allies to push inland. Heinrich knows it's only a matter of time before they overrun his position. He takes a deep breath, steeling himself for what comes next. "I won't run," he decides. "I won't surrender. I will fight here until the end." Further inland at 11 a.m., the 1st Infantry Division begins advancing toward Colleville-sur-Mer. By 12 p.m., the fighting is as intense as it gets, with German snipers and machine gun nests taking a heavy toll on advancing troops. By 2:30 p.m., the German resistance gets a major boost. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, including some 20,000 troops equipped with Panther and Panzer IV tanks, is on its way to the battlefield. Bolstered by the arrival of the Panzers, the Germans began to mount a coordinated counterattack. Elements of the 352nd Infantry Division, supported by the 12th SS Panzer Division, launch a fierce assault on the Allied positions at Colleville-sur-Mer and Verviers-sur-Mer. The fighting is brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The Allies, however, have the advantage of naval gunfire and air support, which helps to blunt the German counterattack and slowly swing the battle in the Allies' favor. By 4 p.m., the Allies have managed to consolidate their positions and repel the German counterattack. The 1st Infantry Division has secured Colleville-sur-Mer, while the 29th Infantry Division holds Verviers-sur-Mer. The 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions have entirely neutralized the German artillery positions at Pointe du Hoc, though at a heavy cost. As evening approaches, the momentum of the battle is indisputably with the Allies. The Allies secured a firm beachhead at Omaha Beach and continue pushing inland, linking up with airborne units and establishing defensive positions. The Germans, though still fiercely fighting, are running very, very low on ammunition and manpower. In the control bunker, Reinhardt curses the dead telephone in his hand. Before the lines had been cut, he had been informed that the 12th SS Panzer Division was on the way. Suddenly, the door of the bunker is blown off its hinges by a powerful explosion. The force of the blast flings Reinhardt across the room, smashing him into the wall and leaving him in a crumpled, broken heap. By the time the Allied soldiers cross the room and reach his body, he has taken his last breath. By midnight, the beach is littered with the bodies of the dead, both German and Allied. Heinrich lay among them, his rifle still clutched in his hands. His eyes are open, fixed on the sky. The Allies have secured a foothold in Normandy, their victory a turning point in the war. For the Germans, it's the beginning of the end. The tide is turned, and there is no going back. Altogether, over 156,000 troops from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and other Allied nations landed on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. Approximately 50,000 German troops were stationed along the Normandy coastline to confront them. Over 7,000 vessels, including 4,000 landing craft, were used in the invasion. The Allies also deployed specialized armor to support the infantry, including the aforementioned Sherman DD tanks, the Churchill AVRE, or Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, which was equipped with mortars and designed to destroy bunkers and clear obstacles, the Crab Flail tanks, modified Shermans with rotating flails to detonate mines and clear paths through the beach defenses. They were supported by more than 11,000 Allied aircraft, which dropped over 13,000 bombs on German positions. By contrast, the Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, once the pride of the German military, was a shadow of its former self by the time of the invasion. On D-Day, only a handful of German aircraft were able to reach the battlefield, and they were quickly overwhelmed by the thousands of Allied planes dominating the skies. The Allies flew over 14,000 sorties on June 6th, while the Luftwaffe managed around 300. When the dust settled, the Allies had suffered around 10,000 casualties on D-Day, with over 4,000 confirmed dead. German casualties estimated to be between 4,000 and 9,000. The immediate aftermath of D-Day saw the Allies consolidating their beachheads and pushing inland despite fierce German resistance. The German High Command, realizing the gravity of the situation, scrambled to reinforce their positions, but the momentum was firmly with the Allies. The liberation of France had begun, and with it, the inexorable march toward the fall of the Third Reich. For the soldiers on both sides, the battle was a harrowing testament to the brutality of war. It was a reminder that in the end, it is not the generals or the politicians who pay the price, but the men on the ground fighting and dying for causes they may not fully understand. And for Heinrich Falk and the countless others on both sides who fell on that bloody beach, their sacrifice, their fear, and their courage is now just a memory swallowed by the river of time. But if the German command had reacted quicker and with superior coordination, perhaps the outcome of the battle, and indeed the fate of the world, would have been very, very different. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Now go check out how I survived D-Day, the Battle of Normandy, or click on this video instead.